A warning. This episode contains adult themes. Please listen with care.
A listener production.
Document examiner Neil Holland has worked on documents related to investigations into alleged Nazi war criminals, accused killers, and dodgy bookies, and resurrected the writing on a document found inside a corpse's stomach. Back in 1985, when Neil was the head of the Victoria Police Document Examination Branch, the National Gallery of Victoria made history, acquiring Pablo Picasso's The Weeping Woman. At $2 million, it was the most expensive artwork ever purchased in Australia. Less than a year later, it was gone. Stolen in a daring heist that left police, the art world, and the media stunned. 18 days after the theft, Neil found himself in the back of a police van in the dead of night, cradling a brown paper package. Inside, the missing Picasso, taken hostage by a group calling themselves the Australian Cultural Terrorists. My name's Liz Porter. I'm a journalist, true crime author, and forensic science obsessive. I've spent my career uncovering how forensic science cracks the toughest cases, writing 3 books on the subject and earning a PhD in the history of the Victoria Police Forensic Science Lab. Join me as I sit down with the world's top forensic experts and discover how forensic science is convicting the guilty and exonerating the innocent.
I was working in a laboratory as a scientist testing blood and urine, but I had a part-time job working in a printing firm of an evening. A job came up advertised at the forensic lab, police forensic science laboratory. At that stage, I didn't know what forensic was. Not like today, everyone knows because of the what's shown on TV, and let alone what's been written and people like yourself doing research on these areas. So I knew nothing about it, but I did have, working with body fluids as such, I did have the experience working in a printing company, so I knew ins and outs, all the generalities and how to make plates and so on for the press. And it was a lot to do with analysis of paper and ink, which is my side of the applied chemistry side of it. And I applied and I did get the job. Documents come into all sorts of things. People think of fraud, bank documents and so on. But that was only a small part of it. The number of homicides I've been involved in where there are documents involved. I gave a lot of evidence against Peter Vados, the silver gun rapist that was operating out east for a period of time.
Your handwriting analysis was able to help police make the link between a silver gun that had been found and its owner.
Yeah. At the time, the firearms weren't found, and his MO was he used a silver gun, and weapons were found wrapped up in the newspaper. The farmer who owned the land was out there, and he saw something in some bushes, investigated, and found a newspaper all rolled up higher up in the tree. Within the newspapers, when they were folded out, were these silver guns. And as the investigation went on, the newspaper that was wrapped around the weapons were, in fact, pages from primarily the Herald Sun, the racing pages. There was particular unusual markings for the placings for each race on oil. And that wasn't just one page out of one newspaper. They were all pages from various newspapers. And when looking at these were so unusual markings, how they were done. They were the same on all the newspapers and characteristic of the same individual writer. As it went on with the investigation, the suspect rapist at that time, which was Peter Vados, he had a training licence it may have been greyhounds, but he was recorded as a trainer. Also, when they arrested him, found out where he lived and went to his home, inside his home, sure enough, are all these racing pages, and they're all marked in a similar way. Likewise, when they looked at his car and searched the car, they found the same thing. So there was a nexus. So my evidence was that those markings, which were so unique and unusual, were by the same hand from the three different sources, the house, from what was wrapped around the weapons, and also from the car, were in fact the same person. And subsequently, they went to the Victorian authority that had all the licences for these particular trainers, and there was a great deal of writing that was made available and markings and whatever, and I was able to tie that via those government documents, licence documents, back to those three lots of paper.
So at the lab, you worked on a huge variety of cases involving different kinds of documents. Sometimes those documents were documents that had been destroyed. For example, betting slips that SP bookies had tried to burn.
Yeah, the Australian government make a lot of money through the racing industry or the betting industry. And at that stage, like there is today, no doubt, SP bookmaking, illegal bookmakers working out a lot of them were just individuals, the small timers working out of maybe hotels in the corner where you could go over there and hand some money over and get a betting slip as such. And of course, the government missed out on that. It was getting to a point that organised crime were getting in. And in doing so, I know one case, for instance, say the organised group had organised and purchased and rented a large floor of a large building, nothing in it, no partitions, just one big concrete floor. In the middle of that, they got some cardboard boxes and built a room within this big space. They could pull some boxes out that allowed entry for the individual, and in that they would have a lot of phones set up, so they were taking and receiving calls and hopefully doing it where no one could hear them and the like. So eventually the Victoria Police set up a task force, and it was called Operation Zebra. When it first started, they were going around initially, undoubtedly in the background, they were looking at the more organised crimes, but in the smaller run of things, they were still going around to hotels, and they were even lifting off bench tops and bringing those into the laboratory, because where they were sitting, they were writing everything down with the writing imps on the bench top.
So they weren't recording bets on paper, they were recording them on the bench top.
On the bench top. The police, under warrant and had the authority, they would remove the bench top. That would come in, and we'd use all sorts of techniques, because while all this is happening and the police are coming in, they're trying to rub it out and whatever. So the little boys and girls working in the industry in that capacity have started to learn that, what we'll do, we'll start writing on the clear adhesive sheets that parents may cover the school books for their children. And when you pull it apart, it's got a white backing sheet and it's got the clear top. Well, they're buying that, and with a certain writing instrument, they were writing on it. As soon as the police come, they'd have a cloth and solve it and wipe it clean. So the police would seize those sheets, and lo and behold, under laser, we're able to bring up all the writing that was there.
The writing was?
All the bets, who put the bet down and how much, and the dividends. Then it went further into the more organised crime. They thought, well, we'll burn the documents. So they had a tray. So if the police came in, they'd throw a match at all the physical paper records. They would burn. But if you didn't break those up, even though they were charred, you could use similar techniques, infrared, ultraviolet, and so on, to bring up what writing was on it. So we go along to court with that, and then they'd say, oh, that's interesting. We won't use that next time. Then it went to, would you believe, they went out and bought the vertical grillers. You don't see vertical grillers too often in the kitchen or wherever. But they were fabulous because they could put the documents in, have it on high all the time. Police arrive, they would just drop the documents in a metal hinged device and drop that in the vertical griller, and they would burst into flame and char. That was fine, but they realised that they were still intact, which was good for us, and we still had the evidence. So it just went on from there that they worked out that, made sure it was turned off. They would then get a ruler or something and put in there and rattle it backwards and forwards to break it up into little bits. And at one stage, they even had a hairdryer to expedite the destruction. At that point, they were pretty well on top of us. But I had one case for the New South Wales Police. They had a certain squad that dealt with this type of thing. They got me involved because when they arrested this individual, he had writing instruments, he had telephones all around him, but no paper. But beside him was an ice cream container with liquid, and when they looked at it and rocked it backwards and forwards, there was like fibres in it. So they got some glad wrap, put it over the top, and that was seized under warrant. And I analysed the contents, and the fibres were primarily North American softwoods, which were getting imported into Australia as a pulp to our paper mills. So analysing the fibres, there was definitely fibres that were used for paper making. So undoubtedly, this is interesting. Paper generally, you look at newspaper, leave it out in the rain, it'll damp, it'll go limp, a couple of days, you'll pick it up and it'll just fall apart. But this is the fibres themselves are disintegrated just into a mass of fibres. The only type of paper around for that is what they call water-soluble paper. So I analysed the contents, and it had a product called carboxymethylcellulose, which is the main ingredient water-soluble paper. So I went up there and gave evidence, and I was in the witness box, and they said, would it not be considered in the toiletry industry that you can buy a soap product and that's enclosed in a fibrous material? You don't have to rip it apart to get the soap product out to use. You would simply go under the shower and rub your back with it or whatever, and it disintegrates. So yes, I said that industry does use water-soluble paper for that purpose. And then he went too far because he said, could you not consider toilet paper water-soluble paper? And I said, well, the definition of water-soluble paper just in general would encompass that. But water-soluble paper for total disintegration, toilet paper doesn't come in within parameters. And I said to him, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't like to use proper water-soluble paper I'm talking about for that situation. All the jury burst into laughter.
On the 20th of August 1986, sometime in the evening, you were sitting in the back of a police van on Spencer Street, cradling a $2 million painting in your lap. Can you tell us the background to that very intriguing image?
Yeah, look, that did occur. Prior to that, a Picasso painting called The Weeping Woman was found to be missing from the National Gallery of Victoria. Now, if we take it back to how it all came about and how I became involved, first of all, over the weekend, the Saturday night, the 2nd of August, if I can remember, 1986, someone in the gallery, whether there was a connection to the gallery itself or an individual somehow got in there by whatever way, removed the Weeping Woman. And it went unnoticed. And one of the reasons it went unnoticed was where the Picasso was on the wall was just a white wall. And there was a little card and it said ACT printed on it. And it was one of the gallery cards that they would normally put up if a painting was on loan. They assumed ACT being Canberra. So they looked at it and thought, oh, well, it's gone to Canberra for maybe whatever. It came to the notice that there were 6 letters sent, 5 to media outlets and 1 to Rafe Matthews, who was the police minister of the day for the Victorian government. And the Age tried to contact the gallery to say, I think you might have a problem because we've received through a post an anonymous letter to say that we have now the Weeping Woman. And they couldn't sort of raise anyone at start, but then things started to get moving. So Mr. McCackey, who was the director, was contacted and he came in very anxious. And Tom Dixon, who was the head conservator there, they waited for him to come in and they asked him, well, you haven't taken it to do some restoration or do something. He said, definitely no. So panic was setting in. And then not only was the Age, but some of the other newspaper outlets who received the envelope as well, and with a letter in it, received it. So they were ringing and saying, this is what we received. At that stage, the police were involved. They realised that it had gone missing, got the police involved. The police got a crew of a number of probably police cadets they probably used to do the search, and they found the frame on top of one of their cabinets, display cabinets. And that frame was the frame that held the Picasso. So they realised there and then that, yes, it had gone. Whether it was still in the building remained to be seen. So Monday morning, with all this frantic action going on, I get the phone call, being head of the document examination branch. They'll bring you up some envelopes with letters in them, and this is the situation. Give it every urgent action you can possibly give it. So that's how I got involved, firstly from examining these envelopes. Now, on the front of them, they had been posted, so there was a postage stamp, Australian postage stamp. There was a handwritten address with disguised writing. It was really basic capital letter writing, unidentifiable type writing. But within the actual letter itself, the typewritten letter from this group, was typed on a typewriter. And of course, going back to 86, it's not like we have the computers of today. Probably the most common form of producing a business letter was the typewriter. So first thing I would do, you treat these, other people may have picked them up with their hands, so you could get fingerprints off those later to eliminate any fingerprints that were brought up. So as soon as it came to the lab and booked in, on with the rubber gloves as such. So I identified that using an Interpol typewriter classification system, by the type of font used, size of the font, all the other characteristics, it was used to identify a make and model of typewriter. So of the 5 of the letters that I received at that point, the 6 in all, same typeface had been used, which just means it's a class characteristic, because at that stage you could say maybe, I can't even remember, that's how old it was, what the make of the typewriter is, but say if it was a Hermes typewriter, at that point all I could say, they had the same typeface. So 5 different Hermes typewriters could have been used. The next stage, because they're what they call class characteristics, next stage is to look at individual characteristics with those typefaces and the ribbon that had been used. Were there any damage? Were there orientation faults, parts broken off the letter forms? You know, with the font, with the serif on it, serifs can get damaged. When I looked through the 5 of the 6 of them, the letters all showed the same damage, exactly the same, really unusual damage. So I could say that they were all off the same typewriter. So just from an investigator's point of view, if they went into a suspect's gallery, premises, office, and they had 10 typewriters there, one was a Hermes, they would bring the Hermes only, not the others. So it helps the police in their initial investigation. So at that point, having that, and we would look at things using lasers, lights, trying to bring up latent marks on them, trying to bring up impressions in them, indentations from something written above them and the like. It was about 16 days, I think it is, that the painting was missing. In that time, because I'd already examined the letters, and then Race Matthews in between received a second letter, so that had a match in it, and they were threatening to burn, and there was all those sorts of things happening. I was really busy because with the Picasso, whether you like a painting or not, it's in the eye of the beholder, of course. I use that line a lot. So there's a lot of people out there thought, what a terrible painting, glad it's been stolen type attitude. So they did their own and sent it to the gallery or to the police or to Race Matthews and say, hang this in its spot. No one would know the difference. So there was all that going on. So naturally enough, who knows, one of those may have been whoever stole it. So all those had to be looked at, the packaging and the like. So there was a lot of interesting things happening in between time. I'd been working late at the lab and got home, had the dinner. We just sat down and the phone rang. It was Major Crime Squad. I said, Neil, when can you get here? He said, we're at Spencer Street Station, now called the Southern Cross. I said, well, what's the reason? He said, well, there's been a tip-off. The media's been informed that there is a parcel there in one of the lockers at such and such. And we've had a look and opened up the door of the locker and there is a parcel. I said, well, give me an hour. I've got to go to the forensic lab, which was in Spring Street, which was at the other end of Melbourne, which was convenient. I got there, the police car, I got all what I needed and required. Police car took me down there. Walking underneath the old station, how it was set up, and we get down to the particular station ramp, turn the corner, and I'm sure there's every media reporter from the country was there, plus their video cameras. I thought, my God. So as soon as I turned the corner, I was pretty startled, and I saw some of the major crime investigators. So there was a single room off the side. So I said, come on, we'll go in there, and what can you tell us? And said, yeah, this is what happened. Anonymous phone call, tip off. They mentioned to me, look, when we had a look, it's been wrapped in brown paper. It has some string wrapped around it, and underneath the string at a crossover point, there is a folded piece of paper. Looks like a letter or something, note. So I said, well, I'll go out and have a look first. And I had a look and I came back and I said, well, look, I'm going to remove that note first before we even look at trying to remove the packaging, because I'd already opened a packaging previously and some wires dropped out, and lucky enough it was a hoax bomb. So you're always mindful of the package itself. So I thought, well, let's see what this note. So I removed that with gloves on.
So at this point, the package is still sitting in the locker. People have just been peering in, and you're the first person that actually gets to take it out. That's
right. But again, like I said, I wanted to see what was on this note before I actually attempted that. Took it out of the eyes of the press into this room and looked at it. I had my equipment there, and it was typewritten. It had the same font as identified with the other letters, and what's more, it had all the individual characteristics that had been typed on the same typewriter as the letters. So getting with major crime and just saying, right, this is what we've got now. As time went on, up to that point, they still had a firm belief whoever was involved, they were probably working in the industry, may have been artists themselves, and what was able to be pieced together, probably they wouldn't destroy the painting. Yeah, the police had felt quite strongly about that, because within the letters, their demands were spend more money on the arts to the Race Matthews, who was the police minister and arts minister of the time, and the second demand was for all the young painters coming through, It's a hard life to earn a living from and whatever. We would like you to set up scholarships, yearly scholarships, and call it, I think that they call it Weeping Woman Ransom or something like that associated with it. And so basically with all that coming in, they felt that these people wouldn't hurt or destroy the painting. Now making a nexus that this parcel was connected some way to the senders, the conspirators, I took it on myself to remove and took it out and took it to the police car to go to Spring Street at the other end. And of course, the press were following and whatever.
You insisted on unwrapping the package alone in your lab. Why was that?
Yeah, that was really important. The reason that came up is that at the police lab, because of the security, we have a policeman on the door, I allowed Tom Dixon from the gallery and also Mr. McCackey to come up to the area. I brought them up holding this package that's wrapped and put it down on the table, and they were there waiting. So I actually had to say to them, look, with what I have to do with this, because of the contents of it, I've got to make sure it is what it is and safe and whatever, I'm going to ask you to leave the building. So they weren't very happy, but I said, well, I won't be starting until you leave the building, and so they had no choice. So they left the building, and I said, when I finish with it, whatever time that is, I'll let you know you can come and pick it up. So that's how all that came about. So they did leave the building.
A hair was found in the packaging and a palm print, but that wasn't your department. What's the kind of forensic evidence you were looking for as you unwrapped the parcel and documented your findings?
Yeah, look, this is the problem with it. You don't know whether you're going to get anything to compare it with, in the weeks to follow. So you have to examine it as if some evidence may come in relative to the materials you've been handling and that were part of the wrapping procedure. In that, there was the paper, of course, was examination of that paper. Examine that for indentations, just like you're taking some notations here on the bench. On the page below, there would be impressions of that. Likewise, you can have wrapping paper on a bench ready to wrap the painting, and someone comes over with a piece of paper and writes something on it, not thinking and not even knowing. So you'd be surprised how many cases have been solved by impressions where indentations of someone's name, signature, whatever's come up on the document, even text of a document's come up on a business document. And that company is saying, we know nothing about this, but on your desk you had this bit of paper, had indented something that the police are looking at, which means two documents that come together, you've got to tell us a bit more about it. So we looked for impressions on that, but there were no impressions on that brown paper. You can get small marks, but you don't know what they're of, but there was no handwritten impressions or anything that could be significant. Documented the string. It was just a common type of string that you could purchase. The knots were, someone had an idea of the appropriate knots that you could use in wrapping properly, not your overall granny knot, as we used to say. So all those were documented, which could be of importance later. Again, from looking at the masonite, the timber around the masonite and so on, there were things to look at there, but there was nothing that really was a mark that you could identify. There's been some major cases where some timber's been cut out of a fence, and that bit of timber's been used maybe in a bomb, and you can relate the cutting edge, how they've actually cut it out of the post or whatever. You've got the grain that you match and so on. So with the frame there and then, the importance part was to the actual painting itself. That frame could be looked at later on if there was a need to do it, because the frame was always going to be kept there as an exhibit. Because if they did find that this particular type of masonite frame was made at a premises, they might have found offcuts for comparison, but nothing like that was done. Likewise, with all the work I did with a typewriter, never received a typewriter for comparison purposes. So there was a lot of work done, but there was no real material for comparison. The police had a lot of dead ends and undoubtedly nothing significant to warrant seizure of various materials.
Did you find that frustrating? Because, as you say, you had, in fact, collected quite a bit of potential comparison evidence, whether it was the letters on the typewriter, whether it was the knots, whether it was the wood, but you were never brought anything to compare it with later.
No, I never found it frustrating because that's the nature of, with a lot of forensics, someone going to a crime scene, they'll photograph, record position of things and bring back things to the laboratory where they feel that they could be significant and could assist down the track, maybe one identifying an individual or an area it's come from and whatever. So you do what you have to do, and all that work is there if needed. That's the thing. If you didn't do it and then they get someone and all that's been lost through an hydrant or someone just handling it with open hands and tearing, all that evidence is gone. You do it and you just say, well, it's documented, move on to the next case, because there was always a lot more.
And you've done a huge amount of work on all kinds of writing on paper, from signatures on paintings and checks and contracts to very old historical documents. And some of those jobs have sent you as far as the FBI lab in America. Can you tell us a bit about why you went to the FBI?
Yeah, look, I've been there on a couple of occasions, or a number of occasions. One in particular was to do with the investigation of war crimes, because 40-odd years after World War II, a lot of supposedly Nazis came into Australia under different names, different assumed identities and the like. And 40-odd years later, they set upon to investigate some of these. There was a considerable number of them, and I got involved in a number of those. And the first one that came up was an individual in South Australia. He had a lot of documents that he had brought over from Europe directly after the war with him. And there was identity documents from the part of the Ukraine. That's where he lived. But the story was that he worked for the local militia, and when the Nazis decided to come through, it was an area where there was a lot of boggy land, so a lot of heavy war machinery, tanks and whatever, couldn't get through into those areas. So they really got on side the local militia, maybe through threats or goodness knows what, to do the dirty work. And that's how it all come about, that he was charged with these war crimes. So in regard to this identity document, which was a Nazi-produced document with a photo in, it was in 3 languages. It was in Russian, it was in German, and it was in Polish. So it was, 3 sections printed in those languages, and there was some ink on them. With a lot of those sorts of documents that come up, the Russians were very good at fabrication of a lot of identity documents. So could it be one of these Russian bogus ones, or could it be the real thing? Because of the content on it was important to the prosecution case. The only people at that stage that had the biggest ink library in the world, writing ink library, initially it was the FBI, but the US Secret Service took it over because they felt that, because the US Secret Service also had they looked after and controlled the firearms part of it throughout America, that it could be used in regard to false applications for firearms and ink analysis might reveal that the documents are bogus. So at that stage, the US Secret Service had them, so I went to their lab. We got the authority prior for me going. I took it over. We analysed it there, and there was 3 different inks on that document, and we were able to identify the manufacturer of those 3 writing inks, and they matched formulations that were all formulations prior to World War II. So now we have a document that has writing ink on it. It was printed, of course, with the different text, but the actual ink was all ink that was manufactured prior to World War II. Anything after that, naturally enough, you could say it's bogus. It couldn't have happened, or couldn't have been dated then. And I gave evidence at the committal twice, and I gave evidence at the top court in South Australia. And the prosecution, they were looking at it and thought they had a very strong case. But in the end, after all the evidence was given, the judge spoke to the jury and said on the evidence submitted, it would be dangerous for you to make a decision basically on that evidence. So the case finished there and then. And immediately after that one, the Attorney General said, right, that's it, no more cases and whatever.
You left the police lab in 1989 to set up your own practice, which continues to the present day.
Well, inasmuch I still have some outstanding courtroom cases to come, but as far as actively involved in, I am retired, which is a nice place to be.
And what was the most frequent kind of case that you would encounter in private practice?
It's so diversified from, you had the big tax lotto fraud in Melbourne here involving a male and female that were charged and found guilty, which involved the old style paper tax lotto document, and there was a large number of arsons involved in that, through to, I did, because of my printing background, get involved in a lot of counterfeiting cases. Went to China in the earlier part of the last 10 years. I was there on a big matter involving counterfeit pharmaceuticals.
Was that the labels on the bottles, or?
Well, it was the whole product. It was a major pharmaceutical, and because like most things were, the genuine article was printed in and the drug manufactured in China. So I was assisting them because there was 82 counterfeit products of this product on the internet at the time. So 82 different, whether some of those were connected or not, or there were 82 different individuals or organised crime producing these, but it was a major problem for the pharmaceutical group. So diverse, like cigarettes, counterfeit cigarettes coming in. And yeah, they're using all the technology that a cigarette manufacturer would use, the printing, the folding machine. So you're starting to look at differences in the inks they were using, all those sorts of things. And there was a lot of work in that area. Scratch ticket technology with the scratchies. I was doing it for here and abroad into Asia before the tickets were being released, to examine those tickets. Could they be compromised in some way? That was a huge part of the work. Not all the work, of course, but that was just an interesting part with scratch tickets.
Well, what you have done and still do is also fascinating. So thanks so much for this, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Crime Insiders Forensics is hosted by me, Liz Porter. It's produced by Holly Mitchell, Dan Mullins and Jade Murray. Sound design is by Link Kelly.